we have been touched. We have been touched by grace. That's what we're doing here. That's why we're in this room rather than at movies or out getting more and more sensual gratification at a punk rock concert or whatever. The reason we are here is because we've touched something. And that is the grace. That is the thing. It has happened. Now, see, this is scary. I'm talking stuff that isn't quite right to say in this community. Because I'm saying it's happened to you, and there's nothing you can do about it. You have been touched by God, and it's all over, baby.
Welcome, dear listeners, to another enlightening journey with the Ram Dass Here and Now podcast. We're thrilled that you tuned in, joining this community of hundreds of thousands of brilliant souls from across the globe who find inspiration in the wisdom and teachings of Ram Dass. Today, we dive into episode 255, Touched by Grace. And this is a continuation from our previous discussion in episode 254, which, if you haven't listened to, I suggest you go back and listen to after this. This was a lecture that was delivered in San Francisco at the Christian Community back in 1978. And in this episode, Ram Dass, unpacks a lot. And one of the things he's looking at is what it's like to be a person who has this bend towards spirituality. And if you're tuning in, that probably includes you. And you probably know this, but most people, no matter how mainstream, have had a mystical experience. And just, think about that the next time we're arguing politics. We've all tapped into this place in one way or another. And so the question is, how would it change our lives if we were to actually live from that place? Both our own remembering of it as well as the common ground of it. So Ram Dass starts to point to an answer in this lecture. And it's one that might surprise you, because I think many of us think about the mystical experience and then this aspect of bliss or expansion that we take home from it. But it also means embracing what some call the via negativa, right? The separateness, the pain, the loss, what some programs called living life on life's terms. And so we learn to do that, but also actively engage from a place of centeredness. So it's, again, a paradox, right, of radical acceptance and action. So, he is going to articulate this far better than I'm summarizing here. So I will turn it over to him. But before I do, I just want to say, if you resonate with these podcasts and want to support Be Here Now Network in bringing these transformative teachings to the world, consider joining our Patreon community. You can get ad-free episodes and skip the intros if you want. Just visit patreon.com/RamDassPodcast and learn more. And for a nourishing start to your day, check out Magic Mind, this delightful morning drink crafted with adaptogens and matcha and L-theanine. It's really quite lovely. Go to magicmind.com/Ramdass and use the code Ramdass for a special discount. And for those of you eager to deepen their connection and understanding of Ram Dass's teachings, please check out our fellowships, where like-minded individuals gather both online and in over 200 local groups around the world. So you can find one near you or join online. Just go to ramdass.org/fellowship. And as always, we hope today's episode enriches your spirit and resonates deeply within your daily life and ripples out for positive effects into the world. So now, without further delay, here is Ram Dass, here and now. Namaste and blessings.
I'd say, Maharaji, how can I know God? He'd say, feed people. I'd say, well, can't you give me some secrets? I mean, you're their living spirit, give me some real, I want some esoteric stuff. I want some secrets I can take it back and sell, And he says, feed people and serve people. Okay, well, that's not, you can't market it, it's just the way it is, all right? But then he did another thing. Every time I would get caught in something, I get caught in anger about somebody being adharmic, meaning doing something that isn't in the spirit, okay? Somebody ripped somebody off or something like that, and I'd get angry. Maharaj, he would get so frustrated with me, and he'd say to me, don't you see it's all perfect? And here was the paradox, that all he was telling me to do was to recognize the perfection of it all, and at the same moment work full-time to relieve the suffering of it. And that literally is the paradox that a spiritual person lives in the world with. Okay? Which you could put it another way, that the higher consciousness is tuned to God, to the law, to the way of things, to the perfection of the unfolding of the living spirit in form. Because when I get angry at you, and I say, you shouldn't have done that, what I am saying, since I understand it's all God, I'm saying, God, like Job, I'm saying, God, if I had made this universe, I wouldn't have screwed up with this person, I would have, couldn't you, if we just corrected a bit, that person wouldn't cheat. Wouldn't it be a better world if you had done that? And I realized after a while that that's a little presumptuous. Because until you stand back far enough to understand why it all is, it's a little presumptuous to decide it's wrong. But to see that it's right, to accept that it's because it is all God, it is all perfect, it's all unfolding perfectly. And at the same moment, not to close your eyes, somebody comes along and it's like the levels, confusion of levels again. I used to teach yoga, hatha yoga, body yoga. And somebody says to me, Ramdas, I want to fast. And I say, well, you're a healthy person, it's great. Why don't you fast for 9 days? You can have some moo tea. And the person says, oh, yes, right. And Ramdas said to do that. And, you can tell him to do anything. It doesn't matter because it's all within the context. As long as they're doing it as a purification, they're doing what they're doing for their reasons. And you're merely an instrument. You're a tool in their game. They invest in you that thing of saying, Ramdas, what should I do? And then you say something, right? It's not going to matter if they stood on their left foot for 3 days. It would do the same thing as fasting for 9, okay? So it comes in after 7 days. I'm sure I'm stepping on many people's toes by doing that. The way it is. You'll be sorry you invited me. It's all Peter's fault. And I come back after, the person comes in at 7 days and says, I say, how are you doing? He said, I haven't eaten in 7 days. I say, great. Give a little ego feeding. You're doing wonderfully. Good work there. I see God's light and go back to it, And then you walk out on the street, like Hate Street, and somebody comes up and says, hey, man, you got a quarter? I haven't eaten in 7 days. Good, you're doing fine. Now, now, there's a very profound message right in that, because suffering, there is a level at which suffering is grace. But because suffering is grace for me, it doesn't mean that I lay suffering on someone else and say, take it, it's grace. See? There's the fallacy. And the ability to see the perfection of the universe, including the suffering, that God didn't make a mistake. That's all perfect. And at the same moment, to do everything in your power to be an instrument of that which relieves suffering. Just because that's the part you play in the whole dance. Not because it's better or worse, you're just playing that part in the whole structure of the game. That's thy will. You surrender. Because once you are aware of these higher planes, you cannot do things which create more suffering. That's the way it is. Because if I have gone to a plane of consciousness where I look at you and I see that you and I are the same stuff, who am I going to steal from? That's like taking out of one pocket and putting it into another. Because I understand, which we call in Eastern parley karma, I understand that if I take something from you, I create paranoia in you and suffering in you, and that ultimately is my problem. Because we are sisters and brothers. We are part of the living corpus of the spirit. And so every time I do something which is a separate act, which separates me from the situation, I merely make my liberation into the spirit, and everyone else is that much harder. And that's what's called creating karma. You got words for it too, but that's that kind of word. Okay. Now, so you end up being a good guy, not because of righteousness. Not because I better be good because somebody's watching. Or I better be good or I'm going to feel guilty. But only a damn fool would be other than good. I mean, you'd have to be an idiot to do the things most people do. Do you understand what I'm saying? Because once you've seen this thing, I mean, you're just going directly in the face of your own experience. You're just making believe you never saw this thing. And well, a lot of the problems that many of us have is that we, in meditation or in prayer, we go into these incredibly high spaces and you look around the chapel and everybody's a brother and a sister and, oh, God, we're all living life. And then you walk out and who took my hat? Like, immediately it's them again. See? And part of our predicament, when we talk about, I'm going all over the place, but it's got some coherence somewhere, I assume, in your mind maybe. You think I know what I'm doing, see? I don't, but it doesn't matter because it's... Okay. See, I began to see my predicament of what it was. See, at first, I came into spiritual work. It is interesting to note, primarily through drugs. And in those days, the game was to get high. And the game was to avoid coming down. That was the way we talked about it. And to avoid coming down, you learned better living through chemistry. You learned that a little of this and a push of that and a sniff of that and a shot of that, and you could almost do it. And then there were a few bad days when you just hide, when you had to go through what was called a refractory period, when you had to let your body rejuvenate before you could use it again because the chemicals, it wasn't, okay. And you come down, and you always were trying to avoid coming down. And then after about 5 years of that, I began to realize that no matter how many times I got high, I was going to come down. It was like what goes up must come down. And then I saw that up and down, there's some fallacy of getting stuck in that polarity. of up and down, and that I had to deal with the downs, stop pushing them away. I had to acknowledge them in order to find God in the downs as well as the ups. So I started to become much more fascinated with why people come down than how they get high, because I realized everybody knows how to get high. Some people do it with sex, some people do it by cooking a bouillabaisse, some people do it by praying, everybody knows how to get high. I mean, it's just, somebody drives a motorcycle, somebody gossips, they all know how to get out of their self-consciousness for a moment. They go to a movie, they do whatever they do. See Superman. Guess that gets you high. Now, the thing that brings you down, a way of looking at that in view of what we've been saying, is that you have habits of responding that you've learned that are not consistent with what you've seen or what you've experienced in these what are called higher states of consciousness or closer to the spirit. And you realize that what you're going to have to do is relinquish those. But they are very much learned. They're very heavily learned. In fact, they are practically the root of who you think you are. So you say, it's an interesting statistic, by the way. Two Catholic professors did a study of mysticism. You may have read it in the New York Times several years ago. A study of mysticism in America. And they found out that roughly 40 million people in America, a sampling showed that statistically that would be the number. 40 million people have had some kind of a mystical experience in their life. It's an awesome number of people. But of those 40 million people, 85% of them say it was the greatest experience of my life, but I never want to have another one. That 85% is not included. This group does not include that. It's part of the other 15%. And you can understand why. Because it was so disruptive to who they knew themselves to be and the way their game was set up that they just couldn't handle the disruptive nature. Now, who we are in a collectivity here is that when we have had these experiences, instead of pushing them under the rug and treating them like a fascinating quirk of events, like, oh, I was overtired and that's why it happened, or, oh, I was in child labor and that's why it happened, we recognize the reality of it and we start to adjust the rest of our lives in order to bring both of those things into focus. Do you hear that? I mean, that's sort of what we're all about here. Okay? And that process of focusing means keeping the channels open so that you are seeing the oneness and the diversity simultaneously. You don't get caught just in seeing the one and lose your discriminative power to see individual differences. You don't get so caught in individual differences like science does that you lose the one. There's that problem of keeping those two going at once. There's the one that Maharaji's telling me. Don't you see it's all perfect? See God's law manifesting. See the perfection of this being. See, it's just perfect, just the way it is. With all its neurosis and all of its stuff, it's just perfect. Okay? It is. It's just law unfolding. It's the divine law being manifest. Forms are all within law. They are not legal law. They're not rational law, because the rational mind is just a little thing. They are natural law. They are God's law. They are what the Torah is concerned with, for example. So you look and you see the perfection, and at the same moment, you don't close your eyes to the physical plane at which the person is suffering. And on the physical plane, you accept your role within this plane to do what you can to relieve the suffering. And that you do because if you're suffering, I'm suffering because I've seen the plane where we're one. Okay? In other words, I'm trying to suggest to you that the motivations for service which hold up best are not service out of altruism, they are not service out of righteousness, they are not service out of trying to get holy, they are service because what else can you do? Because that's just the way of life. When you start to become conscious, you don't have any other choice. I just can't walk away from the suffering of the universe because that's me suffering. And it's purely selfish. Okay? Do you hear that? Selfish not in my separate sense. Selfish in the sense of the self, big S, the one. Okay? And we call it not my but thy will. And the reason we become instruments of thy will is because we tuned in and we experienced thyness as myness. We experienced the oneness of that, and then we become instruments of it. Very automatic process. No great thing. Just automatic. Just the way it happens. Most of us see where we're going before we get there. And therefore, we try to do it prematurely with our intellect, oughts and shoulds. And we end up beating ourselves to shreds with guilt because we can never be good enough. There's no way. Because as long as you are self-consciously watching yourself serve, the service is always going to be less than perfect. The only perfect service is what's called selfless service. Meaning service without self-consciousness, service without a mediating thought form of I ought to serve. Or look, I am serving. What do? I serve. Let me tell you, any definition of who you are is a drag, and I would let it go as fast as you possibly could. Because one of the very exciting things is to find out you don't have to be anybody. Because nobody gets in the door of heaven. As long as you think you're somebody, we have great power positions for you here on earth. And you can be somebody just as long as you want to. But you can't get through the door because narrow is the way. And as long as you're preoccupied with your separateness, you just don't have the key for that door. And it's only when you see the finiteness, the limits of your own game as a separate entity, when you not only see it, but you wallow in it, it's a certain kind of a despair that knows that I, with everything I know and all my everything, my power and everything, it's not going to be good enough. And I suddenly see the handwriting on the wall. It's not going to be good enough. And that despair of the separate entity is an absolute prerequisite in the spiritual journey, as you, I suspect, all know. And only then do you start to die into your method. And then you see your method is no longer an attachment because there's no you to have an attachment. You and your method become the same thing. And then somebody else looking at you says, oh, she serves. But you don't know you serve. You just do what you do. Just like somebody says, she goes to the toilet. There's no more, it's no higher or lower or different. It's just the way of things. See, we get shepherded in. The grace that we in this room have is that we have touched something, or we recognize the possibility of something, or we have been touched. We have been touched by grace. That's what we're doing here. That's why we're in this room rather than at movies or out getting more and more sensual gratification at a punk rock concert or whatever. The reason we are here is because we've touched something. And that is the grace. That is the thing. It has happened. Now, see, this is scary. I'm talking stuff that isn't quite right to say in this community. Because I'm saying it's happened to you And there's nothing you can do about it. You have been touched by God, and it's all over, baby. You can fight it as hard as you want, and you can scare yourself like children play. Oh, I'm scared. Oh, I lost it, but you won't. And you can't. See, now that doesn't jibe with everybody. You can't fall out of grace. Not from where I'm sitting, you can't. What are you going to do, make believe you didn't know? That's like waking up and saying, I think I'll make believe I'm asleep for 10 minutes more. You can't fall. Once the awakening starts, you cannot fall back to sleep. It just can't happen. You just can't do it. You can scare yourself, and I'm sure you do it all the time. Oh, I lost it. Where did I put it? But that thought form, I've lost it, is the veil that's keeping you from it at that moment. And the minute you would go back to following your breath or just hanging out with Christ or whatever it is you do, there it would be again. See, I hang out with all these beings. I hang out with Buddha and Christ and Maharaji and Allah and all these different forms. I love forms. I just love them. And they're all like the community of the spirit. They're all the same being. I mean, I don't see any difference. That's my peculiarity, I'm sure. And sometimes I like that form, and sometimes I like that form. It doesn't matter. I'm just so in love with all of them. What difference does it make? They're who I am. If I would just give up being who I think I am. They're who I'm dying into. I mean, it's like, I'll give you an interesting story. I've written this story, but it's fun to tell. Have I gone over? No. So. I tell by when you rustle, so when you've had enough, just start to rustle, okay? I was living at the temple in India, and there were a number of Westerners there with me. And I found myself getting very angry towards all of them. And they all seemed to be slobs. And I really just wanted to be with God, and my guru was the only one that seemed to have the living spirit, and all the rest of them just seemed horrible. And I got to hate them all, and I didn't want to have anything to do with it. You know how it is with the community at times. And I got more and more upset, more and more angry. And I had a good reason with each one, you know. I mean, it wasn't just random hatred. I mean, it was really, I had very good reasons not to like each person. Maharaji had been constantly calling me up from the back of the temple, and he'd say, Ram Dass, love everyone and tell the truth. And now that seemed an impossibility because the truth was I didn't love everyone, right? And always in the past what I did was I was phony. See, I made believe I loved everyone because you're supposed to do that if you're a holy person. See, but the truth was I didn't. I mean, there was all that stuff in my heart, and I could say I wished I could expunge it, but it was still there, and I always, in the crux of the matter, when the point came, I always made believe I loved them. Okay, I don't know whether you ever do that, but that's cool. Okay. So I thought, well, gee, for a change, I think I'll try telling the truth. And he says, tell the truth and love everyone, and truth gets you to God, and love gets you to God, so why don't I try truth for change, since I've been trying love, and love wasn't quite straight enough because it didn't go with truth. And the truth was I hated all these people, so I started to just say, get out of my room, and I want to be alone, and I can't stand you. And at the time I was under I was doing an austerity, which is familiar to you, I suspect, but this particular austerity was that I was not touching money. Okay, I couldn't touch it, literally touch it. So what it meant. I mean, I was copping out around it. I had a bag man, which means you know, I had somebody who, pay my bus fare and stuff like that, so it was all cool, So I pushed my limits too much. I'm a pretty middle-class guy. But then I got so angry at all these people, I wasn't going to have them as my bag man. So it ended up that there I was, not touching money, and I had no support system anymore. And the temple was 9 miles from where we were living. And it was over mountains and so on. So this morning I was furious, and I walked to the temple by this back mountainous route. And by the time I got there at around 11 in the morning, everybody had been there for hours, having a wonderful time with Maharaji, and they were all eating. And I came in, and of course, the anger was exacerbated considerably by the fact that I had to walk 9 miles. And I walked in, and one of the fellows picked up a leaf plate of food and said, "Here, Ramdas." See, they couldn't decide. They couldn't quite take my anger seriously. They were trying to decide whether to throw me in the lake or what to do about my anger, because I was just sort of a drag from their point of view. And I was so angry that I took the plate of food and I threw it at the guy. Maharaji was sitting across the courtyard. "Ramdas." So I went over and I knelt down by him and I looked at him, and he says, "Kya?" Meaning, what's happening? I said, "Maharaji, I can't stand those people. I can't stand adharma. I can't stand that which takes people away from God. I can't stand it in them. I can't stand it in me. I hate everybody but you." And I started to cry. I mean, wail. It was like the release. This anger had been building for weeks. I didn't even know where it came from. I mean, I suspected him, but I didn't know. But I was furious, and this crying, and he said, he started to cry, and he sent for milk, and he was feeding me milk and pulling my beard and patting me on the head. And after I quieted down, he came up to me, like nose to nose, and he said, "I told you to love everyone." I said, "But you told me to tell the truth, and the truth is I don't love everyone." And he came up closer and he looked at me and he said, "Love everyone and tell the truth." And at that moment, I saw my predicament very clearly. That he was saying, when you've finished being who you think you are, who is someone who, the truth is they don't love everyone, this is who you're going to become. I'm just showing you who you'll be. You will be somebody who loves everyone, and that's the truth. Because you will give up everything that doesn't make it, because that's the way you're going to be in the spirit. And if you don't need it, let it go. What are you holding on to it for? And it was like I saw a casket in front of me that was shaped oddly, not for who I thought I was, but who I would be. It was like I could feel the metamorphosis right at that second. And I looked across and I looked at this group of people I hated. And I saw that with one flick, I saw love, and I was totally in love with all of them. But then what I was stuck with was my pride. And between them and me was this mountain of pride. I mean, when you've had righteous reasons to be angry at people. But my guru said, let it go. If you don't want a guru, don't take it. But if you're going to take a guru, you do what he says. So what'll I do? Shall I work it out with everybody? That's the face-saving way to do it. Well, let's sit down and talk about it. Now, you were a little wrong, and I was a little wrong, and right, and yeah, so we really like each other, and it's called working it out. He didn't say that. I mean, he just said, let it go. Just let it go. So I cut up an apple. Then he sent me across the courtyard to sit down, and he called everybody over, and he says, Ramdas, great person, go touch his feet. So they all came and touched my feet, which made me hate everybody all the more. I saw the predicament, and I cut up an apple into a set of apples into a lot of little pieces, and I took each apple up to each person to feed them a piece of apple, because I know in my heart that if you feed somebody with anger in your heart, it's like giving them poison. So I took the piece of apple and I would hold it and I'd look into their eyes until I could see their soul, which I love, because when you're looking at a soul, you're looking at purity and light and love itself. How could you not be in love with love? I mean, that's the thing that draws you. So I would then put the apple, and it took me about an hour and a half to go through the whole group. And that lesson was so powerful in my life. And then he said to me, you give up a little anger each day and I'll help you. And I can tell you that in the 10 years since that's happened, or the 8 years, my anger has been going and going and going and going, because it's not going to get me to God. So it has no function. And I don't work it out. I don't analyze it. The minute I notice it, I just let it go. It's just not going to get me there. It's not functional. And anything that's not functional, I don't want to have around. I just want to get on with it. I mean, I'm telling you a very fierce teaching, and the way I hear the teaching and what I have to do about it. Because all those personality qualities which reinforce your separateness, if you invest in that reality, you got to live with it. That's why when people say, well, should I go into psychotherapy? I say, as long as the therapist knows that we're all one. The therapist is Christ or Buddha, I'd say yes. Otherwise, be careful. Because if the therapist thinks they're a therapist and you're in the room with them, there's only room for one other person, and that's a patient. And you're not a patient. You are living spirit that has taken form on earth in order to do certain work. That's what you're doing here. That's what I'm doing here. That's who I know you to be. So that I don't take your work. I don't identify you with your blue sweater or your yellow sweater. I don't identify you with your body or with your personality or with your astrology. I honor that that's the form through which you're manifesting. I take care of it properly, and I respect it, but I don't confuse you with that. And the reason I am attracted to speaking to the community of the spirit is because this community knows that. And even though we meet as all these separate bodies, and there is speaker and there is listener and there's all the minds and all that stuff, behind it all, we all know what we're doing here and that we are here. And we realize that this game itself is just another form. There's nothing I can say to you you don't know. My words are not what it's about. They're merely to keep your minds quiet, and mine too, so that we can be together. This is merely an opportunity for us to share being. Because that's what the community of the spirit does. It shares being. It's not knowledge, it's being. Because out of being comes wisdom. There's a difference between wisdom and knowledge. I'll do one tiny more thing and then stop, and then if you wanted to ask questions or leave or whatever. In the term love, I was a psychologist. I was a professor of psychology at one time at Harvard. And I studied a great deal about imprinting behavior in animals. And you know, probably most of you know by now, that there are certain patterns that if you show them to a baby gosling, it'll approach and open its mouth. And if you show it the pattern a different way, it'll run away and hide. And it's built into the mechanism. It's instinctively built in. Well, you and I, in our incarnations, in our bodies here on Earth, we are complex packages of mechanisms of this nature, very subtle mechanisms, chemical, biochemical, psychological, the way we were. And so now and then we meet somebody and we, quote, fall in love. Another way of saying that within this framework I was just mentioning is that that person is the key stimulus. That person is the key that allows you to touch the place in yourself where you are love. When you say, I fell in love with her or with him, it means she or he is my connection to the place in myself where I am love. And when I am in love, the whole world looks different, because love is a plane of consciousness. So that your beloved becomes your vehicle for tuning, for shifting channels. Do you hear what I'm saying thus far? So when two people, and if you want to make it sound, if you want to run the crudity of it through, it's just like a junkie with their connection. And you get hooked on your connection, and you're very worried about what's going to happen to your connection. You want to make sure where they are and that you've got their telephone number. And it's the same way you feel towards somebody you're in love with. You want to possess them. And one of the things that strangles love relationships is that possessive quality of wanting to possess your connection. Because you don't know how to get to that place by yourself. Okay? And that's your vehicle for getting there. And when two people are in love with each other, they are both connections to help each other get into the place of love. And then they meet here in love. Now, what happens is that through spiritual practices, through tuning, through quieting the mind and opening the heart, through just tuning and tuning and tuning, you start to be able to flick through practice your consciousness and your heart until you come into the space of love. And then an interesting thing happens, and if you watch some of the social phenomena that have occurred in the recent years, you'll see that this is an interesting one, that as that happens, you start to experience love towards more and more people. And you learn how to live in a world of lovers. See, now we come back to something that you and I also share, besides just the fact that we are spiritual, sharing a spiritual journey in life. And that is that for us, because you are connected with Christ, and I also with Christ, and also with my guru, and also with other forms, our paths are devotional in nature. And that means our paths are through our hearts. And there are a variety of ways in which the heart path works. In Hinduism, they spell them out. There is the relationship between mother and child, for example, between Mary and Jesus. There is the relationship of friends, like between John and Jesus. There is the relationship of disciple to master. There is the relationship of servant to master. There is the relationship of father and child. There is the relationship of lover and beloved. Now, ultimately, you will find that because of your unique set of patternings, one of those forms will feel most attractive to you devotionally. You will explore them all, but one of them will feel most attractive. But as you get further into it, what I find is that all those ways become my way. And that I get so that everywhere I look, I see my beloved. I don't see the form as a historical form or as a special form. It's as if this is all God. And every one of you is my guru come in drag to catch me. You're coming to say, I'll catch you. You'll think I'm somebody else. You won't see that I'm God too. The quality of my guru was that he was nobody special. Just another being. There was nobody there. There was just, every time you looked, you just fell in love. And my path is very simple, and it's your path. My path is the path of service and of love. Service because there's nothing else I can do. And love because it is such an absolutely royal road through. It's so much easier than the way of Gyan, the way of knowledge. All you have to do is love. Maharaji kept saying to me, you don't have to change anybody, you just have to love them. And when you go around changing people, you forgot perfection. Finally, what you become, or in the process you become an environment, a vibratory rate. Your life is your message. You dwell in love, and everybody that meets you, just by your presence, has an opportunity to come into love. That's all. You don't lay a trip. You don't proselytize. You don't prove. You give people plenty of space. I won't lay a trip on you. I am what I am. And if you don't come on, you're right there. A child will hear it. The hardest person will hear it. I teach in prisons, and I go in and I'm met with paranoia. And all I have to be is straight and just remember, this is my beloved. I don't have to remember, I just have to look. I have to look beyond the mind projections that they're sending out. They're sending out, this is who I am. I'm a mean, watch it. You better watch it. I know who you are, you know. That's their mind net. And their mind net is right there, and right beyond the net is the beloved. Now, it gets scary when you really understand that you're in love with the universe, because love is love. It's got all of it connected with it. It's very open. It's very flowing. It doesn't do well with rules. It doesn't do well with rules. I remember once I was in an ashram in India, and I was, the head of the ashram said to me, Ram Dass, get up and dance. Because I was known because I would ecstatically dance. But ecstatically dance in command is a whole other matter. But I got up because he was the head of the ashram, and he was a very fine man, and he's here in Oakland, Swami Muktanand. And I got up and I started to dance, and I got more and more ecstatic, and in my ecstasy, I crossed over the line in the middle of the hall between the men's part and the women's part. Because ecstasy is ecstasy, you know. And immediately he stopped the music and everything, and the whole thing was over. Because ecstasy has no place in an ashram. And that's one of your predicaments, that when you really fall in love, it just opens and opens and opens, and you just don't know where to hold on anymore. And then you've got to have a lot of trust, a lot of faith. A lot of faith.
This podcast is brought to you by the Love Serve Remember Foundation and ramdas.org. We appreciate you listening, and we appreciate all the support that you've given us. Please continue that support and donate at ramdas.org. We can then continue to share what Ram Dass has been sharing for all of these years. Thank you.